Hey guys, tonight we're pulling back the frilly curtains on a topic that's both awe-inspiring and, let's be honest, a little bit terrifying. We're talking about what childbirth was like in Victorian times, plus a whole lot more. Forget gentle hospital lighting and epidurals. This was a world where your birthing playlist was the sound of a neighbor butchering a pig, and your main anesthetic was hold this dirty rag and try not to scream. Before we get rolling, take a second to like, subscribe, and comment, but only if you actually enjoy this. If not, just politely pretend you fell asleep and blame it on the sound of my voice. Now, dim the lights, switch on a fan for that white noise, and get as comfortable as possible. But let's pause for a second. Have you ever wondered what it was like to go into labor in a world where medical care meant being handed a Bible and a bottle of gin? Was there really such a thing as modest childbirth? Why did doctors think it was a good idea to keep their moustaches but not wash their hands? Did Victorian fathers actually faint, or were they just looking for an excuse to leave the room? How did anyone survive 9 months of corsets, arsenic face cream, and a diet made of mutton and medicinal sherry? Would you last longer in Victorian labor or in line at the DMV? And what on earth was a lying in, and why does it sound like something my cat does after eating a bug? And with that, congratulations. You've just woken up in 1852 in a creaky London townhouse, in the throes of labor. Your midwife is mixing up something suspicious in a teacup. Your husband is pacing outside in a hat that costs more than your mattress. And the neighbor's chimney is on fire, again. Welcome to childbirth, Victorian style. Good luck. You blink awake to the sound of distant horses and your own swollen ankles. Your bed is a lumpy sack filled with straw and disappointment, creaking under the weight of pregnancy, heavy blankets, and Victorian optimism. Sunlight squeezes through thick curtains and you realize with horror it's another day of being both incredibly pregnant and somehow still expected to sweep the hearth. The mattress beneath you isn't so much a mattress as it is a makeshift crime scene, somewhere between an overfilled burlap sack and a rustic, undercooked omelette. Every movement brings the delightful crunch of ancient straw and the faint aroma of last winter's foot sweat. Your pillow is, if anything, an elaborate hoax. A case of soft cotton filled with something lumpy and mysterious, possibly horsehair, possibly yesterday's leftovers, definitely not what the adverts promised in the local gazette. Lying on your side, which is really your only option at this stage, you take inventory. Swollen ankles? Check. Lower back pain? Absolutely. Hunger? Yes, but not enough to risk another trip to the pantry, which is 3 rooms away and protected by at least one territorial cat and a colony of dust bunnies. And that faint sensation of having to pee for the 6th time since midnight? Always. Somewhere in the hallway, a clock clangs 9 slow times, letting you know you've already missed the luxurious window of sleeping in. Not that you were ever really asleep. Pregnancy in Victorian times comes with a unique brand of insomnia, a blend of anxiety, indigestion, and the soft, persistent paranoia that someone will walk in, judge your posture, and ask why you haven't started boiling laundry yet. Because here's the real punchline. Even on days you can barely roll yourself out of bed, you're expected to behave as if you're one fainting couch away from running a marathon. Let's talk about the bedding. Victorians love their layers. Layers of fabric, layers of rules, and, unfortunately for you, layers of bedding that seem designed to trap body heat, nightmares, and the occasional flea. The sheets are crisp, if by crisp you mean vaguely starched and always damp around the edges. Quilts are heavy, smelling faintly of lavender and desperation. And any dreams of a memory foam topper are dashed against the hard, lumpy reality of 19th century upholstery. You try to stretch, but you're immediately scolded by the Victorian universe. Joints ache. Your ribs protest, squeezed from weeks of corsetry. You reach for the chamber pot under the bed, praying it hasn't been knocked over in the night. Modesty is key, So you do all of this while attempting to keep your nightgown, dignity, and sense of privacy intact. A delicate dance performed in the shadows before anyone else stirs. In the adjoining room, you hear the first shuffling footsteps of the household. Perhaps a maid, already lighting the fire, or your mother-in-law, ever vigilant, always 2 cups of tea ahead of you, and ready with another suggestion for proper maternal conduct. Someone coughs. Someone else drops a coal bucket. The day has officially begun, and you, a Victorian heroine, must greet it with all the energy you can muster. Which is to say, the enthusiasm of a tired turtle. As you sit up, or rather, roll sideways until gravity does the work, you catch a glimpse of yourself in the mirror, hair sticking up, face puffy, a look of mild terror in your eyes. You think for a moment about modern luxuries like supportive mattresses and indoor plumbing. Then you sigh, rearrange your nightcap, and prepare for the day's first mission, finding a pair of slippers that haven't been eaten by the dog. Because in Victorian times, being pregnant isn't a reason to rest. It's just another reason for people to expect the impossible. You're tired, sore, and, most dangerously, still in charge of breakfast. But at least you made it through another night without the ceiling collapsing, the bedbugs revolting, or someone naming the baby after Queen Victoria's third cousin. Small wins. That's Victorian motherhood. And so, the day begins. One swollen step, one creaking bed, one deeply unenthusiastic yawn at a time. Forget ultrasounds and vitamins. Your prenatal care is a mix of herbal teas, rumours, and the medical advice of an old neighbour who insists rubbing goose fat on your knees will ensure a healthy baby. Your doctor, if you can afford one, is mostly there to check your pulse and judge your moral character. Let's be clear, when it comes to pregnancy, Victorians take winging it to levels previously only seen in game birds. Your primary care team consists of your mother-in-law, 2 aunts who both claim they saw Queen Victoria once, and Mrs. Jenkins down the lane, who's never had children herself, but knows at least 17 home remedies, all involving boiled roots and at least one alarming quantity of gin. If you're lucky, someone's heard of oranges. If not, well, there's always more boiled mutton. Appointments are less about health and more about etiquette. You might get a visit from Dr. Marmaduke Pumblechook, a man whose moustache enters the room several seconds before the rest of him. He'll ask after your digestion, purse his lips, and then prescribe a brisk walk, followed by a month of not reading any novels, lest you overexcite the womb. If he's feeling radical, he might prod your belly a bit, but never without gloves and always with an air of mild disapproval. The idea of looking directly at a pregnant woman's stomach is, frankly, a bit racy for most medical men of the day. Nutrition is creative. There's a prevailing theory that what you eat determines your child's entire personality. Eat too many strawberries, your child will be born with red hair and a taste for scandal. Indulge in pickled onions, and the baby might arrive with an attitude. So, you sip on weak tea, nibble on stale bread, and try not to give in to cravings for anything interesting. Vitamins haven't been invented yet, but fear not, there's always treacle, which Victorians believe can cure anything from morning sickness to existential dread. For actual medical emergencies, options are limited. Bleeding? Lay down and think moral thoughts. Swelling? More goose fat, possibly applied by someone who claims to be a midwife, but whose real specialty is neighborhood gossip. If you complain too much, you risk being labeled nervous or, worse, hysterical. Treatment for hysteria in the Victorian era? Take a nap and try not to cause a scene. That'll do it. And let's not forget the advice on movement. Victorians are very suspicious of exercise, but also of idleness. Walking is encouraged, but only in moderation, and never up hills, near drafty windows, or during a full moon. Any sudden exertion might cause the baby to turn, or worse, to be born with an unspeakable fondness for the French. Instead, the safest approach is to shuffle decorously through your daily chores, ideally while wearing 3 layers of petticoats and pretending not to be tired. Midwives, if available, bring their own brand of expertise, passed down through generations, full of charm and occasionally accurate. Their toolkit includes a battered notebook, a bottle of camphor, and nerves of steel. They'll recommend things like resting when the moon is high, or keeping a potato in your pocket for luck. No one's entirely sure if these work, but no one's willing to risk bad luck either. Finally, the emotional support on offer is, let's say, understated. Expressions of anxiety are met with stories about how much worse it was for Great-Aunt Hilda, who delivered twins during a thunderstorm, with only a bottle of port and a particularly clever sheep for company. You're expected to be cheerful, quiet, and above all not to frighten the menfolk. So you sip your questionable tea, listen to the old wives' tales, and count down the days until the big event, reassured by the collective wisdom of people who think leeches are a medical breakthrough. And if you make it through with all your wits intact, congratulations, you're already ahead of the curve. You desperately want pickles, but the local grocer only has pickled herring. Victorians believe that whatever you crave will mark your child, so if you want strawberries, prepare to birth a baby with a birthmark shaped like disappointment. Good luck explaining that to the in-laws. Pregnancy cravings in Victorian England aren't just a matter of personal taste. They're a matter of public interest, neighborhood gossip, and future family reputation. The moment you mention you'd like something tart, sweet, or just not boiled for once, a committee of aunts assembles to whisper, judge, and speculate about what sort of child you're about to unleash upon polite society. In the eyes of your neighbors, that longing for a single orange could doom your future offspring to a life of suspicious freckles and continental tendencies. The pressure is, frankly, exhausting. Of course, your own body isn't exactly cooperating. One day you crave apples, the next it's salted pork, and by Thursday, the only thing that sounds appealing is a cold bath and a nap in someone else's house. Every new twinge or flutter is met with collective concern. Ooh dear. Did you feel that? That means the baby will be left-handed. No, a flutter at tea time means twins, or possibly an inheritance from a distant uncle. At this rate, you half expect to give birth to a tiny, judgmental fortune teller. Superstition is everywhere. Your cravings aren't just harmless desires. They're omens. Should you reach for that last tart, someone will gasp and declare, "Oh, you'll have a child with a tart tongue." Touch your stomach when you hear a dog bark, and you're risking a child who howls at the moon. Ask for extra salt, and old Mrs. Wigglesworth from next door will start praying for the baby's soul, convinced you're courting disaster, or at least heartburn. And then there are the other symptoms. Morning sickness is your daily alarm clock, a reminder that your body is not your own, and never was, not in the eyes of Victorian science. If you're lucky, it lasts only until midday. If you're unlucky, you'll be told it's a sign you're carrying a boy, a girl, twins, or simply that you've angered the spirit of the houseplants. Nausea is met with advice. Nibble dry toast. Avoid sharp sounds. Wear lavender sachets around your neck. And, if possible, stop being so dramatic. Swollen ankles? Clearly, it's a punishment for stepping over the neighbor's cat. Dizziness? That's just what happens when you let your hair down too early in the morning. Heartburn? Time to chew on burnt toast and consider your life choices. You'll be offered cures from every corner, herbal teas, mustard plasters, goose feathers tucked under the mattress, and the ever-popular "just stop thinking about it, dear." And while you suffer through your growing list of symptoms, there's the endless parade of warning tales. Did you hear about Mary down the lane, who looked at a painting of a frog during her 8th month and now has a child who loves to swim? Or poor Ellen, who craved gingerbread and gave birth to a red-haired boy who can't sit still. Victorians truly believe a mother's smallest whim could set her child's fate. So no pressure. Let's not forget the classic mood swings. Modern science would call it hormones. The Victorians call it female agitation and recommend less reading, more quiet embroidery, and never, under any circumstances, expressing an opinion at the dinner table. Your own emotions become symptoms to be treated, preferably with fainting couches, smelling salts, and a well-timed change of subject. By evening, you're overwhelmed by a day's worth of cravings, unsolicited remedies, and dire warnings. You resign yourself to a dinner of boiled potatoes, hoping your longing for chocolate cake won't doom your child to a lifetime of mischief and scandalous tastes. Because in the Victorian era, even your most innocent appetites become a moral dilemma, and, inevitably, more ammunition for the in-laws. As the sun sets, you comfort yourself with the knowledge that at least tomorrow's cravings will be new, fresh, and, if nothing else, a perfect excuse to avoid yet another slice of cold mutton. Maternity wear means loosening your corset by one agonizing inch. The advice is clear. Don't let yourself go, even if letting yourself go is the only way you can breathe. Pregnancy is fashion's ultimate prank. Picture this. You're 6 months along, desperately craving air, and every time you sit down, your corset creaks like the hull of a doomed ship. Victorians view comfort as suspicious, something only enjoyed by foreigners, invalids, and people with no sense of propriety. To the well-dressed eye, a respectable pregnant lady should appear both shapely and stoic, as if she simply swallowed a decorative footstool and refuses to mention it. The art of maternity fashion is mostly the art of subtle deception. You're encouraged to disguise the fact that you are, in fact, growing another human. The ideal look? Graceful, untroubled, and a little bit smug. The reality? Sweating through 3 layers of undergarments while balancing a cup of weak tea on your stomach, because your lap no longer exists. A typical outfit starts with a chemise, followed by several petticoats, and topped off with a boned corset that, in theory, provides support, but in practice simply relocates your organs to more exciting places. Over that, you'll add a dress or two, one for modesty, one for display, neither designed for actual movement. On chilly days, there's a woolen shawl or a cape, both highly fashionable and both prone to causing accidental strangulation if you dare attempt stairs. Loosening your corset, even slightly, is considered an act of rebellion. There are tales of women fainting in church, at the dinner table, or halfway up the garden path, all because their stays were laced with just a touch too much Victorian ambition. The solution? Smelling salts, a brisk slap on the wrist, and, if all else fails, sending for the doctor, who will inevitably suggest a cold compress and more resolve. Pregnancy is to be borne with dignity, not drama. Of course, there are specialized maternity corsets, which sound promising until you see one. Picture a regular corset, but with secret panels and extra laces, designed by people who think expandable means makes room for 2 biscuits, not a baby. These contraptions promise support but deliver only the sense that you are being gently but firmly hugged by a judgmental Victorian aunt. Don't even dream of elastic waistbands or maternity leggings. The closest thing to comfort is loosening a single ribbon and hoping no one notices the scandalous lack of restraint. If anyone suspects you of going unlaced, you risk being accused of moral decline and possible fainting spells, to be resolved only by a stern talking to from your grandmother and an extra petticoat for modesty. Color choices? Pastels for innocence, black for mourning, and navy blue for "I hope no one can tell I'm pregnant yet." Patterns are limited, florals for spring, stripes for confusion, and the ever-popular "I made this myself," and it shows patchwork for those on a budget. Shoes are small, tight, and usually leather, with just enough support to keep you upright, as long as you don't walk too fast or turn sharply. As for accessories, Every respectable woman sports a bonnet, a pair of gloves, and, if she's feeling wild, a brooch in the shape of a flower. Jewelry is minimal unless you want people to think you're putting on airs. Pregnancy is not an excuse to slack on appearances. If anything, it's a test of how much discomfort you can endure before losing your mind. By evening, you've survived another day wrapped in fabric, propped up by bones, and suffocating under the weight of social expectation. As you finally unlace your corset in the dim glow of the bedroom lamp, you're hit by a wave of relief. And maybe, just maybe, the sneaking suspicion that, in the Victorian era, fashion is less about looking good and more about proving you can suffer with style. Tomorrow, you'll do it all again, but for now at least, you can breathe. Just don't let anyone see you enjoying it. You're encouraged to eat plenty of boiled mutton, stale bread, and weak tea. Fruit is for the rich. Vegetables are suspicious. And anything with flavor is clearly dangerous. Eating for two? More like rationing for three. Let's set the breakfast scene. The day begins with a cheerful offering of yesterday's porridge, now congealed into a shape that defies all known culinary science. If you're feeling fancy, you might scrape a little treacle on top, though the only thing that really sticks is regret. The bread is, as always, somewhere between a building material and a dental hazard, meant to be softened with a cup of tea so weak it looks offended to be called a beverage at all. Victorian dietary advice for expectant mothers is a delicate balance of science and superstition, with a strong emphasis on the latter. The most important rule? Don't get ideas above your station. Craving an orange? Outrageous. Want a handful of grapes? That's practically a royal scandal. Most advice boils down to eat what's on the table and be grateful for it. Even if what's on the table looks like it's been through several rounds of hardship already. Protein comes mostly in the form of mutton boiled until all texture, flavor, and hope has left the building. Chicken is reserved for Sundays and miracles. Fish makes an appearance now and then, usually pickled, sometimes smoked, always questionable. If you're lucky, you'll find an egg at the bottom of the larder, but don't get too excited. It may or may not be hard, boiled from last month. Fruit, when it arrives, is met with the sort of awe usually reserved for royal processions or the return of a lost cat. Apples are sliced thin and rationed out like gold coins. Bananas are a rumor. Strawberries exist only in summer, and in stories told by a neighbor's cousin's friend who once went to Bath. More likely, your daily dose of vitamin C comes from a potato that's seen better days, and if you ask for an orange, someone will quietly cross themselves. As for vegetables, they are treated with deep suspicion. Root vegetables are acceptable, but only if they've been boiled until they're structurally indistinguishable from your bed linens. Anything green and leafy is considered dangerous for the constitution, possibly French, and likely to cause a scandalous amount of digestive activity. The safest option is always another helping of boiled turnip. If you express a desire for more variety, or, heaven forbid, something spicy, you'll be met with concern and a reminder that too much excitement in the diet can overstimulate the nerves. A pinch of salt is a luxury. Pepper is strictly for show, and anything resembling garlic is locked away for emergencies or exorcisms. The only thing that comes in abundance is advice, most of it useless. Eat plenty, but not too much. Avoid cold foods, except when the weather is hot. And whatever you do, don't let your food touch your emotions, or you'll give the baby a taste for melancholy. Hydration is provided by weak tea, thin broth, or, if you're feeling robust, lukewarm water that's been boiled, strained, and still manages to taste like 19th century plumbing. Milk is only for the truly daring, since it spends most of its shelf life either turning into cheese or quietly fermenting in the back of the larder. Coffee is available, but it's expensive, and besides, everyone knows caffeine will make your baby too lively. which is just what you need in a house with 3 generations and 1 working fireplace. So you eat, you sip, and you hope for the best. Each meal is less about nourishment and more about survival. Yours, your baby's, and your teeth's. If you make it through pregnancy without scurvy, congratulations. You've beaten the odds, 1 bland mouthful at a time. By the end of the day, you're left with a vague sense of fullness, a sharper sense of disappointment, and the nagging feeling that, in the Victorian era, eating for 2 is mostly just pretending you're not hungry while everyone watches. He's reading the newspaper in the next room, carefully ignoring all evidence of your suffering. Victorian men believe pregnancy is catching, so he's keeping his distance, just in case. To be fair, the Victorian husband isn't entirely heartless. He's just operating under the intense guidance of centuries of etiquette, his mother's stern letters, and a medical pamphlet that insists robust masculine nerves are not meant for the birthing room. It's not that he doesn't care. He simply thinks the best way to help is to remain as far away from the female affliction as possible, ideally behind a locked study door with a glass of sherry and a newspaper that rustles with plausible deniability. His responsibilities are clear and comforting. Provide funds for groceries. Tip the midwife if she seems competent. And occasionally inquire about your health in a tone best reserved for asking after a sick horse. "Are you quite well, dear?" he'll say from a safe distance, peering at you as if you're a scientific curiosity. Any more involvement and the neighbours might talk. There's a certain choreography to the Victorian husband's avoidance. At breakfast, he reads the paper so vigorously you could mistake it for an Olympic event. At lunch, he's called away to the office, which, in reality, may just be the garden shed where he stands in quiet panic, trying to remember if he ever took a biology class. At dinner, he offers a polite cough and asks if you'll have more boiled beef, while silently praying you say no, because he's not sure what to do if you actually need help serving it. Sometimes, in a moment of wild courage, he'll try to be supportive. This means sending for extra coal for the fire, or, if he's feeling especially modern, ordering a delivery of tonics from the local chemist, most of which are just brandy with a more expensive label. On birthdays or anniversaries, he might even buy flowers, usually chosen by his secretary or the maid, who assures him that lilies are appropriate for a woman in your delicate condition. He has no idea what that means, but it sounds safe. If you're having a particularly rough day, don't expect hugs or words of reassurance. The most you'll get is a careful pat on the shoulder, as if you might combust into symptoms at any moment. Should you cry, from hormones, hunger, or the sheer effort of not strangling him with a doily, he'll offer you a handkerchief and then back slowly out of the room, apologizing for being born male. Social occasions are his greatest trial. He's expected to act proud in public, but not too proud. After all, it wouldn't do to suggest he knows how pregnancy works. At family dinners, he'll nod solemnly as your mother and sisters trade war stories about childbirth, while he sips his tea in the hope that he'll be excused before anyone says the word labor. If a friend or colleague congratulates him, he'll smile, nod, and immediately change the subject to the weather, cricket, or something equally non-reproductive. Behind the scenes, your Victorian husband is quietly terrified. He's read about women dying in childbirth, knows the risks, mostly through whispered rumors and tragic novels, and would very much like to help, but only in ways that don't require direct contact with actual feelings. In his mind, pregnancy is like a thunderstorm, dangerous, unpredictable, and best observed from a distance, ideally with a sturdy umbrella and a sandwich. Of course, there are exceptions, rare, shining examples of husbands who fetch pillows, offer foot rubs, and even sit beside their wives in the dreaded lying-in room. These men are whispered about in drawing rooms, their reputations a mix of admiration and mild suspicion. Are they too involved, too continental? Is it safe to allow such things? But for most, the standard remains distant, awkward, and cautiously optimistic that if he just keeps out of the way, everything will turn out all right. And if not, well, at least he tried. Sort of. You feel the first contraction and immediately apologize for being a bother. Labor is supposed to be dignified, which is Victorian for suffer quietly while your mother-in-law brings more people into the room. The moment has arrived, the beginning of what Victorians politely refer to as your confinement, as if you're being tucked away like a scandalous novel or a slightly contagious parrot. Your first instinct is, naturally, to minimize the drama. "Oh, do excuse me. I believe I may be in labor," you say, as if you've just remembered to return a borrowed teacup. This is not the time for theatrics. The neighbors are listening, and nobody wants to be the subject of tomorrow's market gossip. Did you hear about Mrs. Peabody? Went into labor shouting like a coal miner, most unladylike. The real fun begins as word gets out. You'd expect a medical emergency to clear a room, but in the Victorian era, it fills one. Your mother-in-law sweeps in with all the urgency of someone hunting for hidden silver. She immediately takes command, opening windows for fresh air, London fog, arsenic, and coal dust, and closing them again because of the draft. She summons the midwife, and, because no childbirth is complete without witnesses, summons half the extended family and at least one neighbor with a strong stomach and a weak grasp of boundaries. The rest of the household is now on high alert. Maids scurry about boiling water for no clear reason other than tradition. The butler pretends to be busy elsewhere, and your husband has transformed into a shadowy figure lurking at the far end of the corridor, clutching his hat and mumbling prayers to whichever saint handles awkward domestic situations. Every time you let out a sigh, someone offers advice, none of which is remotely helpful. Try to relax, dear. Think calm thoughts. Would you like another cup of weak tea? There is, unfortunately, never a suggestion of a stiff drink. Your labor proceeds under the careful watch of the entire community. Privacy is not a Victorian virtue. The best you can hope for is that the curtains are drawn and the parlor door is firmly closed, though this mainly serves to amplify the sound of your contractions for everyone else in the house. Occasionally, someone pops in to remind you to breathe quietly, as if you've forgotten how. Dignity is maintained at all costs, even if it means biting your tongue through the pain and smiling politely between contractions. Midwives arrive, equipped with a battered black bag, a collection of herbs, and the steely resolve of someone who's seen everything and judged most of it. She'll offer practical encouragement, a hand to squeeze, and a muttered warning to keep the noise down, lest you frighten the younger children. If you're very fortunate, she'll actually listen when you say you're in pain. If not, you'll be gently reminded that all mothers before you have managed, and a little discomfort is simply part of the miracle. Meanwhile, your mother-in-law keeps everyone updated on your progress, whether you want her to or not. She's coming along nicely, she'll tell Aunt Mildred, who is already planning which family names to suggest for the baby. The conversation, as always, drifts toward past labors, who fainted, who made a fuss, who heroically completed the ordeal without so much as a whimper. Spoiler, it's always her. The hours crawl by in a haze of politeness and mounting discomfort. You grip the nearest pillow, wish for a modern anesthetic, and try not to think about the fact that everyone in the next room is arguing about baby names, while you try not to scream. Eventually, as pain and propriety collide, you realize Victorian labor is less about you and more about performing resilience under a mountain of lace, rules, and well-meaning but deeply unhelpful relatives. If you make it through with your dignity and your sense of humor intact, you're doing better than most. Congratulations! You are now officially the latest chapter in the family's labor stories. And the baby hasn't even arrived yet. Your midwife arrives in a flurry of scarves, smelling faintly of gin and camphor. She's delivered 20 babies and lost only 5. She assures you that's a good record for the street. She breezes into your lying-in chamber with the confidence of a woman who has delivered half the neighborhood and heard more secrets than the local priest. The first thing you notice is her laugh, boisterous and oddly reassuring. The second is her battered leather bag, which may or may not contain medical supplies, depending on how recently she's had to barter a set of forceps for eggs. Midwives in Victorian times are less medical professionals and more battle-hardened Sherpas guiding you up the mountain of childbirth with nothing but instinct, determination, and a few superstitions inherited from their own grandmothers. Your midwife's toolkit is an odd assortment: a chipped bar of lye soap, a faded prayer book, 2 handkerchiefs, one for you, one for her nerves, and, if you're lucky, an actual pair of clean scissors. Her greatest assets, however, are her nerves of steel and her ability to ignore unsolicited advice from every woman in the next room. Introductions are brief. She feels your forehead, listens to your pulse, and declares the baby will arrive when it's good and ready, not before. Her manner is brisk, no coddling, but a surprising amount of common sense. She is neither shocked nor impressed by the noise, the chaos, or your mother-in-law's insistence that tea with cloves will speed things along. She accepts your suffering as an inevitable part of life, much like the weather or rising taxes, and responds to most complaints with either a muttered proverb or a sharp whistle. What she lacks in bedside manner, she makes up for in practical wisdom. She'll tie your hair back with a length of ribbon she finds tucked in her sleeve. Adjust the pillows with the efficiency of someone who has made do with worse. And, if the labor drags on, will sing a lullaby meant to soothe both you and the baby, though it sounds suspiciously like a drinking song. She encourages you to move about, offers sips of water, and if all else fails, recommends you focus on a spot on the wallpaper and think calming thoughts, like mending socks or shelling peas. Meanwhile, her presence is a source of gossip and reverence among the neighbors. Some say she was born with a caul, a sign of luck. Others insist she once delivered triplets, using only a length of twine and sheer force of will. You'd believe anything at this point, as long as it means you'll survive the night. There's a kind of magic in the way she manages the room. She banishes the extra onlookers with a look that could curdle milk, silences panicking relatives with a wave of her hand, and keeps the fire stoked just enough to prevent a chill, though not so hot as to invite fever spirits, whatever those are. If she prays, it's quick and businesslike, more of a pep talk than a plea to the heavens. If she swears, it's in another language entirely, which somehow makes it sound more official. As the labor intensifies, she grows even calmer. "Almost there, love," she says, for the 5th time, which might be a lie but is soothing all the same. She's ready for anything, except perhaps your husband wandering in, white as a sheet and looking for the brandy. One look from the midwife and he's sent packing back to the corridor, banished with the same authority she uses on stubborn babies and nosy neighbors, through pain, panic, and the endless parade of bad advice. Your midwife is the anchor in the storm, equal parts medical professional, therapist, referee, and part-time magician. She's not perfect, and she's definitely not gentle, but she's yours for the night. And that's more comfort than any Victorian doctor can offer. By morning, whether things went smoothly or the birth was dramatic, she'll tidy up, hand you your new baby, and disappear as suddenly as she arrived, off to the next house in need of her odd mix of practical skills and folklore. And just like that, you're left wondering how you would have survived without her, and whether you'll ever get the smell of gin and camphor out of the sheets. If you're wealthy, you might have a doctor attend the birth, a man who believes in the power of bleeding, brandy, and keeping his top hat on at all times. The midwife rolls her eyes but lets him assist by standing in the corner and offering medical opinions based on phrenology. In the world of Victorian childbirth, nothing says progress quite like having a man with spectacular facial hair and zero practical birthing experience stride into your bedroom, ready to lecture everyone on the superiority of modern science. The doctor's arrival is a small spectacle. He removes his gloves, polishes his spectacles, and inspects the room like a general surveying a battlefield he's only seen drawn on a napkin. If you're lucky, he remembers to wash his hands. If you're not, well, at least he'll keep his boots on the rug. Doctors and midwives exist in a tense truce, like two cats forced to share a sunny windowsill. The doctor is all theories, Greek words, and medical journals. The midwife is all muscle memory and lived experience. He quotes Galen and recommends leeches for the nerves. She mutters that if he brings out leeches, she'll chase him down the street. You can feel the eye-rolling tension between them, as thick as the coal smoke from the fire. The doctor's greatest contribution to the birth is, more often than not, standing nearby and offering advice that would get him thrown out of any modern hospital. He recommends bleeding if things get too exciting, just a pint or two, to keep the humours balanced. He swears by the power of a little brandy for the patient, and a lot of brandy for himself. He's suspicious of the midwife's herbal tea but pours himself a glass anyway. When things get tense, he reaches for his trusty stethoscope, a new invention he barely knows how to use, and solemnly listens to your abdomen like a priest, divining omens from tea leaves. Meanwhile, the midwife does the actual work. She supports you through contractions, shoos away unnecessary guests, and reminds you to breathe. She's seen it all: quick labours, long labours, breech births, and panicked husbands. Her methods are practical, based on generations of knowledge passed down through whispered advice and late-night emergencies. She's not impressed by Latin words or gold watch chains. She's impressed by babies who cry loudly and mothers who survive. Their dialogue is its own kind of circus. The doctor: "Madam, please maintain composure. Too much excitement can prolong labour." The midwife: "If excitement were the issue, you'd have fainted hours ago, doctor." The doctor: "Perhaps a touch of laudanum?" The midwife: "She'll have a sip of water and a hand to hold. Thank you." The doctor: "Have you considered the position of the stars tonight?" The midwife: "Have you considered being useful? If you're the labouring mother, you mostly hope they'll call a truce long enough to help you through the worst of it." The doctor checks your pulse and pronounces it vigorous. The midwife presses a cool cloth to your forehead and tells you, "Nearly there, love." The doctor suggests changing positions. He's read it somewhere, perhaps in a letter from Paris. The midwife suggests changing doctors. Your mother-in-law lurks in the doorway, prepared to pick a side depending on which way the wind is blowing. In truth, the outcomes rarely depend on who wins the argument. If the birth is straightforward, everyone congratulates the doctor on his scientific skill. If it's complicated, it's the midwife who works the miracle, her hands steady as everyone else panics. When things go wrong, blame is shuffled like a deck of playing cards. And stories about that one doctor who tried to deliver a baby with a pair of salad tongs circulate for decades. By the time the ordeal ends, the doctor is already halfway out the door, looking for a tip and a clean cravat. The midwife lingers, tidying up and making sure both mother and baby are breathing, swaddled, and ideally not haunted by the experience. The house is quieter, but beneath the surface, the age-old rivalry simmers on: science and tradition, pride and practicality, all playing out in the strangest, most important theatre in Victorian life. The birthing room. Congratulations. You've just survived the battle of the birth attendants. And the real winner? Whichever one remembered to bring extra towels. Forget the epidural. Your options are a stiff drink, a bite on a leather strap, or maybe a whiff of ether, if your doctor is up to date, and a little bit of a party animal. Otherwise, it's just you and the wallpaper, both peeling under pressure. The Victorian approach to pain relief during childbirth is best described as inventive denial. Pain is considered part of the noble journey, a test of womanly virtue, like embroidery, but sweatier and much, much louder. In a time before the wonders of modern anesthetics, your toolkit consists of household spirits, distractions, and a hope that you're one of the lucky few, with an unusually high pain threshold and a forgiving memory. Let's start with the classics. Gin and brandy. No one in your family will say it aloud, but everyone is quietly rooting for the midwife to slip a tot of gin into your tea for the nerves. You may have a bottle on the bedside table, officially for sterilizing instruments, but unofficially it's there for you or anyone within earshot of your labor. Brandy is another option, especially favored by grandmothers who claim it got them through 6 births, 3 funerals, and the Crimean War. The idea is simple. Numb the body, numb the mind, hope for the best. Then there's the humble leather strap. If it's good enough for horses and sailors, it's good enough for a respectable woman in labor. Bite down, grit your teeth, and focus on not accidentally swallowing it. This is less about relieving pain and more about keeping your screams dignified. Wouldn't want to alarm the neighbors or set off the cat. For the truly modern Victorian, there's a slim chance of something more scientific. If your doctor is a real pioneer, or perhaps has recently attended a rather wild dinner party, you might be offered a whiff of ether. The application is both exciting and terrifying. The doctor, wearing a look of eager uncertainty, drips a small amount onto a handkerchief, wafts it under your nose, and waits to see what happens. The result could be anything: euphoria, oblivion, or just a burning desire to avoid ever smelling that again. Either way, it's better than biting the bedpost. Chloroform makes an occasional appearance, but only for those giving birth in hospitals, or those with a doctor who reads suspiciously progressive French journals. Even then, it's applied sparingly and with more ceremony than effectiveness. The real reason it's used so rarely? There's still debate among the menfolk about whether dulling a woman's pain might lead her into moral decline or, worse, wanting to vote. The more common pain relievers are the distractions available in your immediate environment. Stare at the wallpaper. Focus on the pattern, floral if you're lucky, water-stained and peeling if you're not. Count the cracks in the ceiling, the loose threads in the quilt, or the number of relatives currently whispering on the other side of the door. Someone might suggest singing hymns, humming softly, or thinking about the Queen. Not too hard, though. You don't want to invite anxiety. A surprising number of remedies involve simply pretending it isn't happening. Think of England, someone will say. As if patriotism could conquer pain. Breathe quietly. Don't make a fuss. If all else fails, close your eyes and pray, either for the baby's swift arrival or for the pain to become so intense that you achieve enlightenment, if only for a second. If you do cry out, you'll be forgiven, but only if you apologize immediately afterward for causing a scene. Stoicism is the highest virtue. Anything less is written down in family law. As that time, mother lost her composure. When it's all over, the wallpaper will still be peeling, the gin bottle will be empty, and your family will congratulate you on your bravery, by which they mean your ability to suffer stylishly and not break the furniture. Pain relief in the Victorian era: a prayer, a sip, a bite, and the stubborn hope that next time someone invents morphine a little sooner. There's a bowl of water on the side table, but it's mostly decorative. The concept of germs is still controversial, and hand washing is for radical Frenchmen. If anyone even thinks about Lysol, it's probably being used as a floor cleaner or a dessert topping. In the Victorian birthing chamber, cleanliness is more a matter of social rank than scientific necessity. As you lie sweating through the final stages of labor, you can take comfort in knowing that everything in the room has been thoroughly dusted. At least, dusted in the Victorian sense, which means flicking a feather duster around and then having a restorative cup of tea. Sterility is a term reserved for describing one's maiden aunt, not medical instruments. The bowl of water is changed at least once, when the cat drinks from it, or when a relative faints and needs to be revived. The rest of the time, it sits on the table looking useful, as everyone delicately pretends that the midwife's hands, fresh from lighting the fire or chasing away your uncle from the pantry, are perfectly suitable for delivering a baby. After all, the most important thing is not cleanliness, but the appearance of propriety. Doctors, if present, might rinse their hands before entering, but it's more about warming up their fingers than killing off bacteria. Soap is used for smells and moral reassurance. If anyone has heard of Dr. Payden, Semmelweis and his revolutionary hand washing, they keep quiet about it. Nobody wants to be accused of being a foreigner, or worse, a trendsetter. The last thing you need in the birthing room is a political debate about the dangers of invisible organisms. The bed linens are as clean as the household can manage, which, depending on the day, may mean recently laundered or turned over to hide the worst of the stains. If you're lucky, your sheets smell faintly of lavender and lye. If you're not, they smell faintly of last winter's stew. Every now and then, a helpful aunt will suggest airing out the room to keep away miasmas, clouds of bad air believed to cause everything from cholera to an unfortunate disposition. Windows are opened for a draught, promptly closed for fear of chills, and generally argued over until someone of higher rank makes a final, arbitrary decision. As for instruments, those lucky enough to have forceps or scissors can only hope they've been wiped down with a damp rag and a quick prayer. The idea that microbes might be lurking in the nooks and crannies of household tools is as outlandish as believing the earth moves around the sun. If anything, the real cleaning power comes from a generous application of camphor or carbolic, whose primary function is to create a smell strong enough to knock out a small pony. After the birth, the cleanup process begins in earnest. Buckets of water are fetched, though by now they're mostly for show or for soaking towels that will later be wrung out and used again. The midwife washes her hands, after the fact, naturally, while the rest of the family tiptoes around the mess, offering congratulations and advice in equal measure. Modern listeners may shudder at the lack of hygiene, but in the Victorian imagination, a little dirt builds character, and a healthy fear of drafts keeps the doctor in business. If anyone gets sick, it's chalked up to bad luck, low spirits, or a failure to avoid cold feet. By evening, the room is restored to order. The water bowl is emptied, finally. The sheets are changed if there's time, and you, victorious but exhausted, are tucked in with a cup of tepid tea and reassurances that all is well. Nobody mentions bacteria. Cleanliness is next to godliness, but only if you can manage it between chores, gossip, and the relentless parade of well-wishers. Tomorrow, the bowl will be back, filled with water, hope, and the faint memory of a time before the word sterile ruined all the fun. Until then, rest easy. By Victorian standards, this was a spotless success. After birth, you're moved to a special room where you'll spend weeks recovering or hiding from the rest of your family. Friends visit to criticize your bedding and offer the worst possible advice. No one ever leaves happier than they arrived. Welcome to the lying-in chamber, the Victorian solution to postpartum care and domestic witness protection. This room is your sanctuary, your prison, and occasionally your stage, decorated with lace curtains, florals that haven't seen the sun since the last coronation, and an impressive number of embroidered pillows you are absolutely not allowed to use for comfort. Your main job for the next 4 to 6 weeks? Rest. Which, in the 19th century, means sitting very still while everyone around you discusses whether or not you're doing it properly. The theory behind lying in is simple. Childbirth is dangerous, and so is dust, wind, fresh air, and happiness. You are to remain indoors, preferably in a dimly lit room, shielded from the elements, responsibility, and, if you're lucky, your mother-in-law. The idea is to recover gently. But gently seems to involve being swaddled in enough woolen blankets to survive a polar expedition and drinking weak broth until you start dreaming of roast beef. The parade of visitors begins on day 1. Every lady in your acquaintance, and a few who are just in it for the gossip, arrive armed with casseroles, advice, and unsolicited commentary on your choice of wallpaper. Isn't this lace a bit fussy? Didn't you have another quilt last year? You know, in my day, we used fresh straw. Every suggestion is presented as both a favor and a test. And the correct response is to nod graciously while plotting ways to restrict future access. Then come the gifts. Blankets, baby bonnets, and at least one knitted item of mysterious origin, possibly intended for a dog. Your best friend brings a basket of pears. Your great aunt brings a basket of regrets and stories about childbirth in the 1830s. Somewhere in the pile is a bottle of tonic recommended by the local doctor, a syrupy concoction that tastes like sadness and peppermint, guaranteed to either boost your spirits or put you to sleep until spring. As for the room itself, it's less about luxury and more about the illusion of luxury. You are forbidden to do chores, but you are also forbidden to look unkempt. Someone will brush your hair daily, sometimes with enthusiasm, sometimes as an excuse to deliver more advice. The sheets are changed with ceremony, which mostly means someone moves the top sheet from the bottom of the bed to the top to keep the energy fresh. Your diet is controlled by consensus. Tea, broth, thin gruel, and occasional treats that are so bland you wonder if flavor has been banned by Parliament. Anyone suggesting something spicier is met with scandalized gasps. Everyone knows spicy food can induce excitability, and there is nothing more dangerous in Victorian recovery than excitement. Excitement, after all, is how you ended up here. Occasionally, the door is opened for a breath of air, which means someone fans you vigorously for 30 seconds before slamming it shut, lest a stray breeze undo all your progress. The rest of the time, your window is covered with thick curtains, both to block sunlight and prevent any passing illnesses from entering, as if influenza travels like a nosy pigeon. Your only true moments of privacy come late at night, when the house has finally quieted. The baby is temporarily asleep, and you can relax just enough to ponder whether you'll ever get to leave this lace-filled quarantine. The truth is, the lying-in chamber is equal parts recovery, ritual, and performance. If you emerge looking healthy and demure, the family will take credit. If you look tired, they'll blame the drapes. After a month of this, you're officially declared fit for society once again. You dress, smile politely, and step out, knowing you've survived Victorian postpartum care. Your reward? You get to do it all again next time. Sleep tight. The lace will keep you safe, or at least busy. Until then, the local ladies gather to shower you with advice, casseroles, and occasionally a baby-sized bonnet knitted by someone who hates you. The competition for who suffered most in childbirth is fierce. Victorian baby showers, though not called that, as shower sounds suspiciously American and possibly immodest, are less about celebrating new life and more about airing grievances, flexing social muscles, and ranking who had the roughest time in the lying-in chamber. It's a delicate dance of one-upmanship, self-sacrifice, and casseroles so dense you could use them as doorstops. Preparations begin with a flurry of invitations, mostly delivered by hand, bonus points if you have a child run them around town. Guests arrive in bonnets, gloves, and at least 3 layers of social anxiety. The parlor fills with the scent of lavender water, questionable perfumes, and undercooked turnip pie. Seating is arranged by rank. The eldest ladies in the best chairs, everyone else clustered on stools and ottomans that have seen too many reupholsterings and not enough soap. As the tea is poured and the lemon cakes are distributed, 1 per guest, no seconds, gluttony is frowned upon, the real purpose of the event emerges. Every woman is armed with a story, usually beginning, "When I was in labor with my second," or, with little Georgina, they said I wouldn't last the night. The tales escalate quickly. 30. 6-hour labors, breech births, forceps that looked suspiciously like fireplace tongs. Each detail is designed to horrify, impress, and win the coveted prize of most suffering. If you, the new mother, dare to mention your own ordeal, you'll be swiftly one-upped by at least 2 relatives and a neighbor with a limp. Someone will offer advice, never medical, always moral. Wrap the baby in wool, dear, even in July. Feed him arrowroot biscuits, nothing else. Keep him away from left-handed people. It's bad luck. Every suggestion is wrapped in a layer of passive aggression, as if the advice is really an accusation about your questionable housekeeping. Of course, there are gifts. The presents are both practical and mysterious. a rattle carved from a piece of questionable wood, a homemade blanket that smells faintly of onions, a bonnet sized for a very small sheep, and a tiny silver spoon for luck, and also, apparently, for future dental bills. The best gifts are displayed with ceremony. The less attractive ones are quietly hidden behind the fern. The refreshments, meanwhile, are a tour of Victorian food hygiene. Tea is served with milk that may or may not be fresh. Scones are hard enough to challenge the dental health of anyone brave enough to bite. Someone brings aspic, a wobbly, mysterious mass containing carrots and what looks like ham, and everyone politely pretends to enjoy it, careful not to mention the last time they got food poisoning at a gathering. And then there are the games. Though games is a generous word, sometimes it's a guessing contest. How big is the baby's head? No one wins. Sometimes it's more physical. Who can fold a napkin into a swan the fastest? Or who can wrap a baby doll in a shawl without waking the host's dog? Mostly, though, it's a competition to see who can sit with the best posture and offer the sharpest, most veiled compliment. You're looking almost yourself again, dear. Throughout the event, the hostess keeps an eagle eye on the proceedings, making sure no one leaves without at least 3 pieces of unwanted advice and a lingering sense of inadequacy. By the time the last bonnet has disappeared down the walk and the leftover aspic is banished to the pig trough, you're left with a pile of gifts, a few cryptic warnings, and the realization that, in Victorian society, motherhood is a team sport, and most of your teammates are secretly hoping you fumble. As night falls and the house finally grows quiet, you can at last tuck your baby in, unwrap your new, possibly cursed, knitted bonnet, and sigh with relief that the worst is over. Until next time, when it will be your turn to shower another unsuspecting new mother with all your best stories, casseroles, and judgment. News travels fast, usually by loud neighbor. Expect a flood of well-wishers, each with opinions about your baby's name, weight, and resemblance to someone you hoped to forget. In Victorian England, birth announcements are not about privacy, they're about spectacle. If you thought you might get a quiet moment to adjust to new motherhood, you've underestimated the social machinery of the 19th century. Announcing a birth is a community event, whether you like it or not. Even before you've had a proper cup of tea or figured out what day it is, the news has already made its way through the village, across town, and to that distant cousin who only shows up for funerals and free cake. If you're well-to-do, you might send out formal birth announcements, delicate handwritten cards, delivered by footman or postal service, sealed with wax and self-importance. These are dispatched with military precision, and recipients will scrutinize every detail. Is the script elegant enough? Is the paper too thick? Was the wax the right color? God forbid you forget to include a second middle name. Aunt Agatha will never recover. For the rest of society, the announcement process is far more organic, meaning chaotic. The midwife might mention your happy news at the butcher's. The maid will relay the story at the market, with a few creative embellishments for dramatic effect. Your mother-in-law is already writing to every living relative, using phrases like sturdy child or robust lungs, which are code for the baby screamed like a banshee. And the wallpaper may never recover. Then comes the gossip network, which moves at speeds that would put the Telegraph to shame. Mrs. Butterfield from across the street pops by just to check in, then leaves with enough details to keep her knitting group entertained for a week. By noon, everyone knows your baby's weight, length, time of birth, and whether your husband fainted. He did, and he'll deny it for the next 20 years. Opinions are mandatory and immediate. If you name the baby after a beloved ancestor, someone will claim you've skipped an even more beloved one. If you choose something modern, Arthur or Florence, expect a discussion about the decline of traditional values. The baby's hair is dissected for traces of family resemblance. Looks just like his great-uncle Harold, rest his soul, except with fewer whiskers. Oh, the nose is pure Thompson. I'd recognize that anywhere. No one ever says, "He looks like a potato," but everyone is thinking it. If you're modern, meaning live near a railway and enjoy scandal, you might place a notice in the local newspaper. These are brief, formal, and utterly cryptic. On the third inst, Mrs. John Smythe was safely delivered of a son. No details, no flair. Just enough information for everyone to fill in the gaps with rumours. Inevitably, someone will misread the date and arrive at your doorstep 3 days late, demanding tea and an introduction. The well-wishers descend, bringing more advice, more gossip, and an unending stream of commentary. He's big for his age, isn't he? You must be feeding him cream. Is she sleeping through the night yet? It's been 3 hours. Have you thought about starting music lessons early? And, of course, when will you try for another? Because in Victorian England, the only thing more interesting than a new baby is the potential for the next one. Inevitably, the house is filled with flowers, cards, and casseroles you're too tired to eat. Somewhere in the chaos, you'll overhear 2 aunts arguing about whether your child will inherit your husband's notorious stubbornness or your charming disposition. The answer, as always, is both. By the end of the day, the news has travelled to every corner of your social world. The telegraph may have been invented, but nothing beats the efficiency of a determined neighbour with a loud voice and an eye for scandal. You collapse into bed, baby finally asleep, grateful that at least tomorrow's news will be someone else's turn. Your baby is whisked away, scrubbed with questionable soap, and wrapped tightly in so many layers they resemble a very small, angry burrito. The crying is a sign of good health, or possibly a premonition of future dental work. The Victorian approach to newborn care is equal parts folklore, optimism, and a healthy disregard for modern pediatric advice. Once the baby is finally deemed out, the midwife, part nurse, part magician, part crisis manager, takes charge. With practiced efficiency, she inspects the newborn from head to toe, counting fingers, toes, and the number of relatives already jostling for a first look. The family cat is shooed from the bed. Your mother-in-law mutters something about the Thompson chin. The air is thick with lavender, panic, and the sweet scent of soap that's been used for everything from laundry to shoe polishing. First up, the bath. Or, as the baby will later describe it in therapy, the original trauma. The water is tepid, the soap a block of something that's seen more uses than a chamber pot, and the sponge suspiciously scratchy. The baby wails, which is taken as a very positive omen. Everyone knows a hearty set of lungs predicts both future leadership and a robust appetite for boiled mutton. If the newborn is quiet, everyone gathers to prod, frown, and offer helpful suggestions like try tickling his feet or give her a whiff of onion. Eventually, the baby is pronounced lusty, spirited, or, if especially shrill, definitely a Thompson. Swaddling is the next order of business. This is not a gentle wrapping. This is the ancient art of transforming an ordinary child into a log fit for winter storage. The Victorians believe a tightly swaddled baby will grow up straight and true, with good posture, tidy habits, and zero opportunity for mischief. So, layers are applied. An undershirt, a gown, another gown, just in case, followed by 2 flannel wraps, a knitted blanket, and, for good measure, a shawl that belonged to a great-aunt. By the end, your child is both unrecognizable and entirely immobilized, a decorative loaf with eyes. Of course, no one can agree on the correct temperature. One aunt will claim the baby's nose feels cold and demand another blanket. Another will insist that a flushed cheek is a sign of overheating and rush to open a window. The poor child is subjected to a rolling debate about drafts, moisture, and the dire consequences of catching a chill, which, according to family legend, can be traced to every misfortune from colic to an eventual career in accounting. Once the swaddling ritual is complete, the newborn is presented like a trophy to every member of the household. Grandparents inspect, uncles peer, Siblings poke. The baby blinks at the unfamiliar world, takes a deep breath, and, in most cases, resumes wailing. Excellent lungs, everyone agrees. Someone suggests a small taste of sugar on the lips for luck. Someone else proposes a dab of whiskey on the gums for the nerves. The midwife wisely intercepts both, muttering about moderation and the dangers of spoiling the child before they've even reached their first nap. Feeding is next on the agenda, a minefield of opinions and household traditions. Breastfeeding is preferred, if possible, but not without drama. Various herbal teas are prescribed to encourage the milk, and dire warnings are issued about eating onions, cabbage, or anything with too much flavor. If breastfeeding fails, there's always cow's milk, goat's milk, or a homemade formula that features ingredients best not mentioned in polite company. As night falls, the baby, still swaddled into submission, is tucked into a wooden cradle, watched over by more relatives, and possibly one or two protective household saints perched on the mantel. The new parents collapse with relief. The midwife packs up her bag, and the rest of the household begins debating names, futures, and which side of the family the baby will disappoint first. Welcome to the Victorian world, little burrito. Good luck, you're going to need it. If you're lucky, you can breastfeed. If not, the Victorian solution is cow's milk boiled into oblivion, or patent formula with ingredients that would make a modern pediatrician weep. Some families swear by beef broth, others just hope for the best. Feeding a newborn in the Victorian era is less a science and more a cross between alchemy, folklore, and competitive guesswork. The house is filled with advice, most of it contradicting, all of it delivered in firm, knowing tones. Aunt Prudence insists that babies should be nursed every 2 hours on the dot, rain or shine. Cousin Edna, who's never had children herself, believes feeding on demand leads to weak moral fiber. Your mother-in-law suspects that looking a baby in the eyes during feeding will cause it to develop improper ambitions. If you do manage to breastfeed, congratulations. You're simultaneously congratulated and criticized. Is the baby eating too little? Too much? Are you drinking enough mother's tea? A blend of boiled fennel and self-doubt. And heaven forbid you eat cabbage or onions. Rumor has it one wrong vegetable, and your child will have nightmares until adulthood. If the baby fusses, everyone immediately suspects your milk is too thin, too rich, not wholesome, or possibly tainted by reading novels. The only thing everyone agrees on is that breastfeeding is natural, so why are you making such a fuss? But sometimes, nature does not cooperate, or your household's social ambitions require an alternative. Enter the wet nurse. A well-paid, discreetly referenced local woman with sturdy arms and a resume longer than your grandfather's sermon notes. Wet nurses are hired to provide milk and, sometimes, to model good moral character. It is considered vital that the wet nurse not be given spicy foods, strong emotions, or access to local gossip, lest her milk become contaminated by scandal. For those without a wet nurse or patience, there's the infamous bottle. The 19th century feeding bottle, known as a soothing siphon or, more honestly, a murder bottle, is a glass vessel with a length of rubber tubing that is almost impossible to clean and just as difficult to use. Every family swears their bottle is the best, even as everyone quietly agrees that bottle-fed babies are a little bit odd. Cleaning these bottles is a full-time job, usually performed with a knitting needle, a damp rag, and whatever prayers seem most appropriate. The result is, at best, mildly sterile and, at worst, a breeding ground for adventure. And then there are the patent formulas. Early advertisements for these concoctions read like a witch's shopping list. Arrowroot powder, malt extract, sago, barley water, and sometimes, for good measure, a splash of brandy or port. Modern science would call these recipes nutritionally mysterious. The Victorians call them tried and true. A good formula, so they say, will put meat on a baby's bones. A bad one is blamed on the grocer or the phase of the moon. For the truly desperate, or the especially creative, there is always beef broth. Yes, really. Simmered, strained, and cooled, beef broth is spooned into tiny mouths as an all-purpose cure for colic, fussiness, and existential dread. Some households even add breadcrumbs or a dash of sugar, because if there's one thing the Victorian diet loves, it's improvisation. Every feeding, regardless of method, is an occasion for judgment. Is the baby gaining enough weight? Too much, and you're spoiling them. Too little, and you're neglectful. Does the child seem peevish? Was that a smile, or just wind? Each answer sparks another round of advice, stories, and anxiety. When the feeding is over, the house sighs in relief, at least until the next round in 2 hours. The bottles are boiled, the spoons are wiped, and the baby, miraculously, survives, growing plumper by the day, ready for their next adventure in Victorian nourishment. You, meanwhile, are left to wonder if any baby, in any century, has ever been truly satisfied. At least you can sleep tonight knowing you tried, and tomorrow you'll try all over again. The entire family dresses in their finest, which is to say, the least stained. The church is cold, the ceremony is long, and everyone leaves convinced the baby has caught a draft. A Victorian christening is not just a religious rite, it's a logistical marathon, a fashion show, and a test of how many relatives you can fit on one pew without violating building codes. The day begins with a flurry of activity, as the entire household scrambles to locate gloves with matching pairs, hats with feathers pointing in socially acceptable directions, and boots that, if not polished, can at least pass as tastefully weathered. Babies are easier to dress, in theory, but the chosen gown is often a family heirloom last worn by someone named Ethelfreda in 1792, and now large enough to double as a picnic cloth. Preparations take hours. Someone finds the christening cap, slightly yellowed but still intact. Great-Aunt Mildred appears with a silver rattle and a critique of your choice of blanket. Your husband puts on his cravat upside down. You, meanwhile, are frantically tucking stray hairs into a bonnet and wondering if the baby will survive the ordeal of so many well-meaning pinches to the cheek. The journey to church is an event in itself. The baby is swaddled within an inch of their life, then bundled into the family pram, which has a wheel that prefers left turns and a canopy that keeps out neither rain nor compliments. The wind is biting, the sky is grey, the road is muddy. The procession moves at the pace of a funeral, trailed by cousins, neighbours, and a dog that may or may not belong to you. Upon arrival, you're greeted by the local vicar and the collective gaze of half the parish, all eager to assess the baby's constitution. The church itself is colder than the outside air, echoing with the shuffling of boots and the muffled coughs of people desperately trying not to sneeze during the prayers. You squeeze into your reserved pew, sandwiched between relatives and a lingering cloud of mothballs. The ceremony is solemn, beautiful, and, let's be honest, endless. The vicar intones blessings in a voice made for foghorns. The baby, who has been dozing peacefully, chooses this moment to wake up and object, loudly, to the holy water. Strong lungs, whispers someone approvingly. Your husband fumbles with the prayer book, drops it, and retrieves it with all the grace of a man whose boots are 2 sizes too small. Everyone is on their best behavior. Godparents stand ready, clutching gifts of silver spoons and moral support. Names are recited, first, middle, and an obligatory nod to whichever ancestor can be appeased by naming rights. The baby's head is wetted, the candles are lit, and the godparents are solemnly reminded of their lifelong duty, which is mostly to send birthday cards and occasionally intervene when the child considers running off to sea. After the final hymn, endured, not sung, the family gathers at the altar for the official portrait. This involves arranging everyone so that no one's hat blocks the view and all the children are facing the right direction, which takes longer than the ceremony itself. The baby is red-faced, the relatives are hungry, and the vicar is already eyeing the door. Back home, The party continues with tea, sandwiches, and at least one incident involving spilled jam on the heirloom christening gown. The older relatives reminisce about christenings past, arguing about which baby screamed the loudest, caught the worst chill, or produced the most promising godparents. Eventually, the guests depart, leaving behind empty teacups, scattered crumbs, and a baby finally asleep, sniffly, overdressed, but officially welcome to the world. You collapse into the nearest chair, grateful it's over, wondering how you'll ever get the stains out of that gown. In the end, the christening is less about divine intervention and more about surviving another chapter in the ongoing family epic, one drafty church and too many lace bonnets at a time. The prevailing wisdom is that babies should be seen and not heard, preferably wrapped up and put somewhere out of the way. A cold bath builds character, and teething is solved with bread crusts and the occasional drop of laudanum. Welcome to the world of Victorian childcare, a finely tuned system that straddles the line between tradition, wishful thinking, and politely ignoring common sense. Once the christening is over and the relatives have retreated to their own cold, drafty houses, it's just you, your baby, and an ever-rotating cast of self-proclaimed parenting experts, most of whom have never met a child under the age of 12. Victorian babies are swaddled tightly, sometimes so tightly they can barely wiggle a finger, which is exactly the point. The less a baby moves, the less trouble it can cause, and the easier it is for the adults to go about their day pretending not to hear the occasional wail. If you're very proper, you might install your baby in a cradle by the window, ensuring they get plenty of fresh air, also known as whatever breezes leak through the cracks in the glass. If the child fusses, simply add another shawl and offer stern encouragement to settle down. There's a good darling. Daily baths are encouraged, provided the water is slightly colder than the baby's comfort zone and the windows are left open for a bracing crosswind. Builds the constitution, they say, as your infant regards the tub with wide, betrayed eyes. Towels are rough and drying is brisk, but at least you can rest easy knowing your child is now both chilly and characterful. As for entertainment, toys are rare and usually homemade. The classic rattle, a handful of wooden blocks, or, if you're wealthy, a terrifying porcelain doll with eyes that follow you around the nursery. Otherwise, babies amuse themselves with their own feet, the fringe of a nearby rug, and the occasional family pet who has learned to give the cradle a wide berth after several unfortunate incidents involving a grabbing hand and a fistful of fur. Teething is a rite of passage for both parent and child. The preferred remedies include giving the baby a hard crust of bread to gum at, a silver spoon to gnaw on, or, for those truly at wit's end, a dab of laudanum on the gums. Laudanum, a cheerful mix of opium and alcohol, was Victorian England's answer to just about everything. Colic, teething, fussiness, and, probably, existential despair. If that doesn't do the trick, there's always the old standby of pretending nothing is wrong and waiting for the tooth to emerge in God's own time. Feeding routines are strict and supervised. The baby is expected to take milk at set intervals, preferably while being watched by at least one critical grandparent and a maid taking notes for future gossip. Solid foods are introduced with great ceremony, and only after a long debate about the relative dangers of carrots, potatoes, and anything grown within reach of French air. If the child chokes or refuses to eat, you're told it's a sign of stubbornness, not indigestion. Discipline begins early. Babies are to nap on schedule, regardless of mood or meteorological conditions. Crying is discouraged, bad for the lungs, and affection is doled out in small, careful doses, lest the child become spoiled. Instead, you are encouraged to cultivate independence by leaving your child alone for short stretches, preferably in a room where they can admire the wallpaper and reflect on their own shortcomings. The rest of childhood follows this same pattern, long on superstition, short on coddling. If the child survives the first year, against all odds, poor advice, and the occasional brush with laudanum, they're considered robust enough to join the ranks of older children, where new adventures in character building await. As night falls, you tuck your baby in, whisper a quick prayer, and hope the prevailing wisdom knows what it's talking about. After all, in Victorian England, the goal is not just to raise a child, but to raise a future adult who never complains about drafts, soft food, or the occasional dose of opium. Sweet dreams, little one. For all the pomp and pageantry, survival is not guaranteed. Whole families hold their breath for weeks, while doctors argue about whether fresh air or never leaving the house is the key to survival. Sometimes both at once. The truth, whispered behind every lace curtain and heavy velvet drape, is that in Victorian England, bringing a baby safely into the world is only half the battle. The real challenge begins the moment the last well-wisher leaves and the house is quiet, except for the uncertain cries of a newborn. In a world brimming with medical advice but short on medical progress, you become an expert in superstition, wishful thinking, and crossing your fingers whenever the baby sneezes. Statistics don't make it onto the birth announcement, but everyone knows them. As many as 1 in 4 babies might not see their first birthday. It's a terrifying, sobering number, one politely ignored at social gatherings and fiercely obsessed over in private. In every family tree, branches are thinned by loss. Names remembered more for the weight of their absence than their presence. Victorian families love large broods, but not just for the company. It's an insurance policy against the randomness of disease, bad luck, and the state of the local well water. Doctors are summoned at the first sign of trouble, but their opinions are as varied as their facial hair. One insists on cold air, open windows, and brisk walks in the garden. Another orders the nursery to be sealed tight against drafts, sunlight, and new ideas. One recommends warm baths, the other, dry towels and moral fortitude. All agree on the healing power of good spirits, by which they mean sherry, for you, not the baby. Meanwhile, your relatives become amateur physicians overnight. Grandma prescribes onion poultices for fever, Aunt Edith swears by vinegar foot baths, and Cousin Harold arrives with a homemade cough syrup that's 90% rum and 10% wishful thinking. Rub goose grease on the chest, someone whispers. Tie a red ribbon around the crib. Never let the baby sleep with a cat in the room. The cat, for its part, remains the healthiest member of the household. What makes it all so much more absurd is the randomness of fate. The healthiest-looking baby might catch a chill from a trip to church, while the scrawniest child, who started life chewing on bread crust and optimism, might grow up to outlive everyone. Every sniffle is cause for alarm, every quiet night a reason for gratitude and anxiety. Neighbors keep score of every loss, each small white grave a reminder of how precarious life remains. Funerals are quietly efficient, attended by a cluster of solemn hats and red-eyed mothers, followed by brisk returns to the business of daily survival. The stories linger. Remember Mary's twins taken by scarlet fever? Did you hear about the parson's baby, lost after that dreadful summer? These tales are woven into the fabric of family life, a strange mixture of warning and consolation. The best anyone can do is wash their hands, sometimes keep the baby warm, but not too warm, and pray that their luck holds out. Yet, in the midst of these grim realities, life goes on. Babies are christened, songs are sung, and hope is stubbornly reborn with every new birth. Mothers hold their little ones a bit tighter. Grandmothers knit an extra layer of warmth. And fathers go to work whistling a tune that sounds suspiciously like a ward against bad luck. Each day the baby thrives is a small victory, celebrated in quiet ways. A new tooth, a gurgle, a night with fewer tears. By the end of the first year, if your child is still with you, the sense of relief is overwhelming. There's a party, of course, with weak tea, stale cake, and more than a few silent prayers of thanks. For all the hardships, there is resilience, and for every grim statistic, there's a stubborn Victorian spirit that refuses to give up. You tuck your baby in, exhale, and marvel, quietly, at the simple, stubborn miracle of survival. Your rest period is filled with visitors, housework, and subtle reminders that you should be up and about, making dinner, and not looking so tired. Congratulations on your new baby and your new back pain. The Victorian promise of postpartum recovery is that, for a precious few weeks, you will be allowed to rest and recuperate. What this means in practice is that you're quarantined to the lying-in chamber for a fortnight, surrounded by lace curtains, lavender sachets, and a schedule designed by people who believe leisure is an act of rebellion. You'd expect a little peace and quiet, maybe some gentle support. Instead, you get a revolving door of relatives and more unsolicited advice than you received during 9 months of pregnancy. Each morning, you wake to the sounds of clattering crockery, footsteps in the hallway, and the unmistakable voice of your mother-in-law informing the household that you seem a little peaky. Breakfast arrives in bed, but only as a prelude to a stern conversation about how you mustn't get used to the luxury. A woman's place is in the home, dear, not in bed, unless, of course, she's embroidering something useful. Within hours, visitors arrive. Neighbors, church ladies, cousins you haven't seen since your last tooth fell out, all eager to hold the baby and offer guidance. "Oh, you're still abed?" Well, in my day, I was scrubbing floors by day 4 and milking cows by dawn. One aunt drops by to peer at your complexion, another critiques the arrangement of your pillows, and a third brings you a pie with the subtle suggestion that you'll want to get your figure back soon. Even the midwife returns, this time to recommend taking the air, which really means go outside and start weeding. Any actual rest you might attempt is constantly interrupted by household noise, the baby's relentless appetite, and your sense of Victorian duty. If you so much as close your eyes, someone will gently remind you that laziness breeds weakness. The maids tiptoe through your room, pretending not to notice you drooling into the bedsheets. Meanwhile, your husband, marveling at your resilience, wonders aloud whether you might join him for a stroll after dinner just as soon as you've set the table. Then there's the housework, which never truly pauses. By week 2, you're expected to start supervising again, which is Victorian code for doing all the chores from bed and feeling guilty about it. Laundry must be sorted, meals must be planned, and all complaints must be voiced in a tone soft enough not to disturb the menfolk, even as you attempt to balance a baby in one arm and a ledger in the other. Someone will sigh that women today have it so much easier. Hygiene remains a production. Bathing is recommended only in tepid water and always with supervision. Heaven forbid you slip and give the family more gossip. Your hair is brushed daily by a rotation of female relatives, each with her own technique, ranging from gentle detangling to disciplinary action with a boar bristle brush. Clean sheets are provided, but only if you promise not to spill broth on them again. The end of your rest period is marked by the abrupt return of real life. The lying-in curtains are swept aside. Visitors expect you to be bright-eyed and brisk, and you're handed a to-do list the length of Bleak House. The baby, meanwhile, continues to demand attention at all hours, but that's only to be expected. After all, motherhood is the noblest form of exhaustion. By the time you are officially declared recovered, you've discovered that rest, in the Victorian sense, is an endurance sport. The prize? The satisfaction of surviving, a slightly stronger back, and the knowledge that if you can make it through this, you can make it through anything, especially another round of guests. So, tuck yourself into your least-stained nightgown, close your eyes for a blissful moment, and know that true rest is a fantasy best reserved for your next life. For now, there are potatoes to peel and a baby to bounce. Welcome to recovery, Victorian style. No childbirth is complete without commentary from every branch of the family tree. Expect unsolicited advice about how things were done back in my day, which was probably 2 years ago. In the Victorian household, family is both a blessing and an endurance test, especially once a baby arrives. The first to descend is usually your mother-in-law, who enters the house as if it's still hers, adjusting the curtains and appraising your posture before you've even finished your first postnatal cup of tea. She comes bearing practical gifts, knitted booties, odd-smelling liniment, and impractical opinions. "Are you sure you're holding the baby right, dear? When I had your husband, I made all the nappies myself, with one hand, during a thunderstorm." Her advice is always delivered with the kind of gentle force that leaves no room for argument. If you nod, you're accused of being a pushover. If you disagree, you're reckless and modern. There is no middle ground, just a battleground hidden under layers of lace and the subtle tightening of bonnet strings. Then come the aunts, each a minor expert in Victorian childcare, domestic economy, and the fine art of competitive suffering. Aunt Mildred recalls the time she delivered twins alone during the Great Gale of '47 and was back in the kitchen by dusk. Aunt Ada, childless but determined, critiques your swaddling technique. "It's all in the wrist, dear." She demonstrates, leaving your baby looking like a surprised sausage and you wondering if it's too late to move to Canada. Your sisters-in-law are a different breed, fellow survivors of the family, but quick to distance themselves from your mistakes. "Oh, we never had trouble with little Percy," one sighs, glancing meaningfully at your wailing bundle. "But then, we always believed in early discipline." You are tempted to point out that little Percy is currently climbing the mantelpiece and eating buttons, but good manners prevail. For now, the most exhausting branch, however, is the uncles. Men who believe their only contribution to childcare is a loud opinion and a fondness for cigars. Uncle Geoffrey, never seen without a waistcoat and a story, will wax poetic about the days when children were seen, not heard, and certainly not cuddled in public. His contribution to the conversation is mainly smoke and confusion, but tradition demands he be heard out. No visit from the in-laws is complete without a formal inspection of the nursery. The lighting is scrutinized. A bit dim, isn't it? The temperature debated, a touch too warm for good lungs, and the cleanliness of the sheets discussed as if Parliament is about to pass judgment. There will be at least one whispered debate about whether or not the wallpaper is cheerful enough for childhood. The baby, meanwhile, responds by spitting up on the best cushion, which you privately consider a small victory. Food is another battleground. If you breastfeed, someone will whisper it's too forward. If you use a bottle, it's dangerously modern. Your choice of baby food is a matter of public debate. "Nothing wrong with a little mutton broth," declares Great Aunt Agnes, spooning something suspicious into the baby's mouth while you're not looking. Puts hair on their chest. Your husband, sensing danger, quietly retreats behind a newspaper, hoping not to be noticed. By the end of the visit, you feel as if you've survived a gentle but relentless cross-examination. The baby, exhausted, finally sleeps, surrounded by a collection of new bonnets and enough advice to last until the next royal wedding. You collapse into your chair, grateful for the peace, already anticipating the next round of helpful suggestions. In the Victorian world, dealing with in-laws is a rite of passage, an ongoing performance in the theatre of family, and a masterclass in passive aggression delivered with extra bonnets, a side of nostalgia, and a knowing look that says, "You'll thank us later." Or you won't. Either way, you'll have stories for the next generation, and a secret stash of emergency sherry, just in case. Eventually, you're wheeled out for public display in a giant pram, layered in so many blankets that only your baby's nose is visible. The air smells of coal smoke, optimism, and a passing horse. This is the Victorian equivalent of making an Instagram debut, except with more starched bonnets, less personal agency, and a much higher risk of accidentally running over someone's foot. Outings are ceremonial. The housemaid brings the pram from storage, dusts off 3 months' worth of attic cobwebs, and inspects the wheels, which haven't turned since the last baby's parade. The pram itself is an architectural marvel, a cross between a royal carriage and an upcycled tea cart, large enough to house twins, a dog, and a small trunk of emergency blankets. Preparation is half the battle. The baby is bundled and rebundled until it's less child and more textile experiment. Socks, booties, mittens, hats, shawls, and an heirloom quilt are stacked in strategic layers, carefully engineered so that no breeze, draft, or prying eye can actually see the baby's face. Your mother-in-law supervises, declaring it's still just a touch brisk and adding one more blanket for good measure. You, on the other hand, are crammed into your best outdoor wear, a corset, 3 petticoats, and a walking dress that makes sitting in the pram or moving at all a logistical nightmare. And so the parade begins. Down the garden path, over the uneven pavement, into the public eye. Every neighbour and tradesman comes to the window to see. Mrs. Butterworth leans out with a congratulatory wave and a reminder to keep the baby's head covered. Mr. Pickering, sweeping his stoop, comments on the child's robust snore. You smile and nod, pretending this is all perfectly normal, which, in a sense, it is. There are rules for the pram parade. Move slowly, faster than a saunter, and you'll be accused of recklessness. Pause frequently to adjust a shawl, admire the weather, and answer questions about the baby's weight, appetite, and temperament. Isn't he a sturdy one? She's got her father's brow. You know, in my day, we walked the baby twice a day, rain or shine. All statements must be acknowledged with a polite smile and the kind of ambiguous nod that can be interpreted as agreement or fainting. As you make your way past the shops and the park, you encounter the true gauntlet of the Victorian pram parade, unsolicited advice. Elderly ladies suggest herbal remedies for everything from hiccups to shyness. Young mothers compare blanket stacking techniques, as if insulation is an Olympic sport. The local chemist's wife offers to send over a tonic for wind, while a passing clergyman blesses the pram with a quote from Proverbs and a cough. Every so often you stop for a break on a bench. The baby, swaddled into submission, sleeps blissfully unaware of the attention, the noise, and the risk of being pinched by an overly affectionate neighbour. You, meanwhile, take in the parade of horses, dogs, and errant geese that are a fixture of Victorian public life. If you're lucky, the breeze carries the faint aroma of fresh bread from the bakery, and not just the ever-present scent of coal smoke and whatever mystery item the neighbour's goat has dragged into the road. Eventually, you make it home, exhausted but triumphant. The baby is peeled from the layers like a prize from a nesting doll, red-faced but mostly unharmed. Your own hair is slightly flattened, your shoes are muddy, and you have acquired at least 3 new recipes for beef broth and 1 stern warning about the dangers of unchaperoned breezes. In the end, the Victorian pram parade is less about fresh air and more about public display, proof to the world that you, your baby, and your extensive collection of blankets have survived another day. You collapse into the nearest chair, grateful for the privacy of your own 4 walls and already dreading tomorrow's walk. Rest easy. You have been thoroughly seen, judged, and admired, Victorian style. Your doctor prescribes something for your nerves that's basically opium dissolved in hope. Leeches are for when things get serious. Castor oil is for everything else. The Victorian medicine cabinet is less a collection of remedies and more a display case for the age of ambition, when anything that smelled sharp or looked vaguely alarming was classified as therapeutic. After childbirth, your first sign of trouble, nerves, sleeplessness, the suspicion that you may never sit comfortably again, is greeted with the cheerful arrival of laudanum, a little bottle of brown liquid. Laudanum is a concoction of opium, alcohol, and wishful thinking. Just a spoonful calms the nerves, soothes the baby, and, if taken regularly, ensures you spend half your waking hours blissfully ignoring the state of your laundry and the rising number of bonnets in the hallway. Laudanum isn't just for mothers, of course. Fussy infants, anxious fathers, and even the occasional pet can find themselves dosed for their own good. If someone looks tired, distracted, or a little bit too cheerful, the answer is always the same. A drop of laudanum, dear, and a lie down. Side effects include light euphoria, gentle addiction, and a tendency to wax poetic about absolutely nothing. But should something more dramatic arise, a fever, a swelling, an unfortunate case of childbed fever, it's time to reach for the leeches. Nothing says modern medical science like letting a small, eager parasite attach itself to your skin and hope for the best. Leeches are available at the chemist's or, in a pinch, from the garden pond. Your doctor applies them with grave ceremony, promising they'll draw out the bad humors and restore your balance. The family gathers to watch. The children are both fascinated and horrified, and you are left with a small round souvenir and a renewed appreciation for modern antibiotics. For anything else, constipation, colic, a touch of the vapors, or simply the sense that life is moving too quickly, there's always castor oil. No Victorian household is complete without a bottle of this thick, oily liquid sitting ominously on a kitchen shelf. It tastes like regret, but is believed to cure everything from indigestion to moral failings. Mothers take it to speed recovery, babies are given it to strengthen the bowels, and fathers sometimes sneak it into the garden to feed to the roses. Even the cat is not safe from a well-meaning dose. Beyond these three stalwarts, the medicine cabinet holds a rotating cast of remedies. Camphor for colds, smelling salts for swooning, beef tea for weakness, and treacle for those long winter afternoons when nothing else will do. Elderberry wine is prescribed for coughs, vinegar for fevers, and burnt toast for everything else. If you can't find relief, there's always hope in a new patent medicine, guaranteed to cure female troubles, brain fatigue, or excessive fondness for reading novels. Your doctor is the gatekeeper to all this wisdom, arriving with a black bag full of dubious bottles and even more dubious credentials. He listens to your complaints, frowns thoughtfully, and prescribes bed rest, or perhaps a little more activity, depending on the latest article in the Gentleman's Quarterly of Healthful Living. If your symptoms defy diagnosis, he might suggest prayer, or simply waiting to see if the problem sorts itself out. What's remarkable is not that so many Victorian families survived, but that they did so despite their medicine cabinet. Yet somehow, a mix of stoicism, sleep deprivation, and the occasional well-timed nap sees most new mothers through. The bottle of laudanum remains, quietly evaporating in the corner. The leeches are returned to the garden pond, and the castor oil is left for the next emergency. You, meanwhile, emerge slightly more cautious, a touch more skeptical, and deeply grateful that the only thing you have to take before bed tonight is a warm cup of tea and the knowledge that your medicine cabinet no longer bites back. Prevention is mostly wishful thinking, complicated by the church, social pressure, and complete lack of effective methods. If you ask about it, people will assume you're possessed by French ideas. In Victorian England, discussing birth control is like dropping a live ferret into the tea tray. Everyone is suddenly anxious, no one makes eye contact, and by the end, someone is definitely going to faint. The unspoken rule is simple: don't talk about it. Don't think about it. And, above all, don't give the vicar a reason to look disappointed in your direction. For most women, family planning means hoping that their cycles, their stars, and their overworked husbands will all align perfectly for at least a few months of blessed reprieve. There's no pamphlet, and certainly no discreet trip to the chemist. If you dare to even whisper about the subject, you risk being branded a woman of easy virtue, a troublemaker, or worse, continental. Not that the Victorians don't have their own methods, none of them particularly effective, and all of them shrouded in mystery, rumour, and the faint whiff of desperation. There's the old standby of counting the days, a system that presumes both clockwork regularity and a level of communication with your spouse that would be considered radical in most households. For those more scientifically minded, there are douches of vinegar, syringes of questionable origin, and even pessaries made of wool, beeswax, or, if you're really unfortunate, old bits of sponge. Modern medicine would weep. Of course, most men are barely aware these methods exist. Victorian husbands, taught from a young age that all things feminine are best left undiscussed, operate under the impression that children are a gift from God, a sign of household prosperity, and the best way to guarantee a steady supply of people to fetch their slippers. On rare occasions, a doctor might be consulted, usually by the husband, who will return home with advice that boils down to travel more or keep your mind on higher things. Practical solutions. These are not. The Church, for its part, is absolutely clear. Every child is a blessing, every pregnancy a sign of virtue, and the only acceptable method of limiting family size is abstinence, preferably after the age of 60. Priests thunder from the pulpit about the dangers of unnatural acts, and pamphlets warn of spiritual ruin for those who tamper with the Creator's design. The only thing less popular than birth control is admitting you've even thought about it. Society enforces its own set of rules. A woman with fewer than 5 children is quietly suspected of selfishness, or perhaps an unfortunate constitution. Too many children, on the other hand, and she's accused of carelessness or lack of restraint. It's a tightrope walk between sainthood and scandal, and nobody provides a safety net. Then there are the remedies sold by travelling peddlers. Bottles labelled Mother's Friend, or Dr. Bolton's famous tonic, which promise everything from gentle relief to the restoration of natural harmony. Most are sugar water or, occasionally, something a good deal stronger. Some women swear by them, others avoid them, knowing a neighbour's cousin's wife who took one and ended up with twins. All things considered, the most common birth control method is resignation, followed closely by prayer, and, if all else fails, vague hope. Women swap stories in whispers, laugh grimly at the latest gossip, and learn to accept whatever comes. Another pregnancy, another round of congratulations, and another seat at the family table. And so, family life expands, the nursery fills, and the subject of birth control remains what it has always been in Victorian times. An open secret, an ongoing joke, and a reminder that, in some ways, the more things change, the more they stay the same. If you're lucky, you'll get a good night's sleep before the next blessing arrives. If not, well, you've had practice. As you sit by the fire with your baby, a cup of weak tea, and a 1,000-yard stare, you wonder how anyone survived Victorian childbirth. The answer is, barely, and with plenty of stories to terrify future generations. It's a quiet moment at last. The visitors have gone home, the in-laws are finally out of advice, and the pram sits dormant by the door, waiting for the next parade. The baby is sleeping, swaddled, fussed over, thoroughly judged, and, against all odds, still breathing. You cradle your mug, stare into the middle distance, and let your mind wander back over the gauntlet you've just run. It's not exactly the peaceful family scene described in etiquette manuals. It's more like surviving a particularly creative round of historical dodgeball. You marvel at the ordeal. The diet alone was enough to test your will to live. Boiled mutton, bread that could moonlight as a doorstop, and tea so weak you suspect it's just hot water that passed a tea leaf on the stairs. The promise of eating for 2 revealed itself to be more a lesson in rationing than indulgence, and the closest you came to vitamins was breathing in when someone peeled an apple nearby. The fashion was its own trial, corsets and petticoats, all carefully designed to keep you upright, breathless, and thoroughly miserable. Every day spent in a tightly laced gown was a masterclass in pretending not to itch, sweat, or despair, all for the sake of modesty and appearances. If you dared to loosen your stays, you risked scandal and at least 3 stern lectures about letting yourself go. The birth itself, a symphony of panic and politeness, was conducted under the keen gaze of the neighbourhood, 24 relatives, and at least 1 doctor whose primary contribution was not fainting. Pain relief was a gamble, gin if you were lucky, ether if you were progressive, and a hearty prayer if you were truly Victorian. Cleanliness was, at best, an aspiration, and more often a decorative bowl of water and a hope that nothing truly invisible was lurking nearby. After the birth, recovery was a tag team match between unsolicited advice, passive-aggressive help, and the slow, relentless return of daily chores. The lying-in chamber, for all its lace and ceremony, was less a spa and more a holding cell for weary mothers and their catalogue of aches, complaints, and dreams of solitary walks in the park. But perhaps the greatest mystery of all is how the babies survived, swaddled within an inch of their lives, doused with castor oil at the first sign of trouble, and marched out for air in a pram big enough to host a family reunion. Every sniffle was cause for alarm, every sleepless night a test of faith and fortitude. If a child made it to their first birthday, the family threw a party not just for the milestone, but for the statistical miracle. Yet through all of this, the rules, the risks, the relentless expectations, somehow people endured. Families persisted. Babies grew up, some of them even cheerful, and mothers survived long enough to pass their stories down with a knowing smile and a cautionary tale. The hardships became family lore, passed from generation to generation as both warning and badge of honor. And so you sit, in the flicker of the firelight, your child dozing beside you, and you give thanks, not just for survival, but for the stubborn humor and resilience that carried everyone through. You know that someday, you'll tell your own story, of laudanum and lace, of boiled potatoes and sleepless nights, of how you survived Victorian childbirth with your dignity mostly intact. Tomorrow will bring new challenges, new opinions, and maybe, just maybe, a stronger cup of tea. But tonight, you've earned your rest, your quiet, and the gentle knowledge that you made it through. Before you're even in labor, everyone in the neighborhood has an opinion on how to keep evil spirits, fairies, and colic at bay. The prevailing wisdom: hang a bunch of cabbages over the door, keep all the windows closed, and, under no circumstances, let the baby look at itself in a mirror. If all else fails, bribe a local chimney sweep for good luck. The more absurd the superstition, the better you sleep, assuming you ever sleep again. Victorian England, for all its primness and scientific aspirations, is a wonderland of superstition when it comes to childbirth. You might think the local doctor, armed with a stethoscope and a positively heroic mustache, would scoff at such folk traditions. You'd be wrong. Even the most rational physician looks a little uneasy if you mention banshees or the wrong kind of moon. In the weeks leading up to your due date, your house becomes a test kitchen for every charm, ritual, and culinary defense known to British folklore. It starts with the cabbages. No, not to eat. Heaven forbid you actually enjoy your vegetables, but to hang in doorways and over cradles. Cabbages, for reasons no one can explain, are believed to ward off evil and ensure a smooth delivery. There's something about the sturdy, common cabbage that Victorians find comforting, perhaps because it's the only thing that grows reliably in English weather. By the time labour begins, your house resembles a greengrocer's with a flair for avant-garde interior design. Then there's the business with windows. Close them all tight to keep out spirits, especially during a storm, a new moon, or when Mrs. Pickering down the road starts humming funeral hymns at her laundry. Air is considered both a necessity and a threat, capable of healing you or killing you depending on who you ask. Open a window for too long and you risk inviting chills. The catch-all cause for every Victorian ailment, from sneezes to existential malaise. Mirrors are a special case. Letting a newborn see its reflection before it's christened will, according to legend, ensure a lifetime of bad luck, crossed eyes, or an unfortunate resemblance to whichever uncle everyone is quietly trying to forget. Draping every reflective surface in the house isn't just for mourning. It's a full-time job for nervous aunts and superstitious grandmothers. If your baby catches its own eye, expect a week's worth of whispered prayers and at least 2 home visits from the local vicar. Perhaps the most charming superstition is the hiring or bribing of a chimney sweep. These soot-blackened men, normally considered omens of prosperity and clean flues, are elevated to near-saintly status during childbirth. If a sweep blesses the house, luck is sure to follow. Some families even invite a sweep to touch the baby for extra protection. Although the wisdom of handing a newborn to someone who's just spent the morning in a fireplace is questionable at best, still, everyone agrees, better a little soot than a little misfortune. If you have spare time, and you won't, you might also be instructed to tuck a silver coin under the mattress, hang a sprig of rosemary above the bed, or sleep with a bread roll by your side to soak up bad dreams. Should you crave strawberries or apples, beware. The shape of the fruit you desire may imprint itself on the baby's skin. At least, that's what your neighbor's cousin's friend swears happened in 1834. The result of all this superstition is a home that smells faintly of produce, is alarmingly well insulated, and has just enough odd tokens hidden in its corners to confuse even the most determined ghost. Every relative, friend, and passing tradesman adds their own ritual to the pile. In the end, your peace of mind is less about logic and more about the comfort of traditions, no matter how bizarre. So you hang your cabbages, close your windows, bribe your sweep, and hope for the best. Maybe, just maybe, the collective hope of the neighborhood, woven through these odd, endearing rituals, will see you and your baby safely through. And if not, at least you'll have a good story for the next mother who asks about the magic of childbirth. Your older children are enlisted to help with the new baby. In practice, this means a lot of sticky fingers, accidental hair pulling, and one near miss with a chamber pot. Victorian child rearing is a group project, and siblings alternate between cuddling the newborn and plotting their escape to the neighbor's garden for a taste of freedom and unwashed apples. In the grand tradition of Victorian households, having more than one child is considered both a sign of prosperity and a practical labor force. Each older sibling is immediately promoted to junior nurse, a position that comes with no pay, little training, and the unspoken understanding that someone will eventually end up in tears. Sometimes the baby, sometimes the sibling, occasionally the family dog. The delegation of childcare is less about fostering sibling bonds and more about managing chaos with a smile. The eldest daughter, barely out of pinafores herself, is tasked with watching the baby while you rest, which in Victorian terms means peeling potatoes with one hand and writing thank you notes with the other. She sits beside the cradle, telling elaborate stories about fairies and monsters, occasionally losing track of which is which. The baby, unfazed, gurgles contentedly until a younger brother appears with a wooden sword, demanding a duel and scattering blocks across the nursery floor. The boys, for their part, are enthusiastic. Sometimes too much so. They're eager to demonstrate the principles of physics by launching small objects over the cradle purely in the name of science. If you leave them alone for more than 5 minutes, you'll return to find the baby wearing a hat made of socks and the cat wearing a look of deep regret. The older siblings mean well, they really do, but their help usually requires you to intervene before anything or anyone gets permanently tangled. Sometimes, the baby is passed around the household like a much-adored, slightly sticky parcel. Each sibling claims a special talent. One can soothe the baby with off-key lullabies. Another has perfected the art of fetching fresh napkins, if only he could remember to wash his hands first. The youngest, desperate to join in, brings treasures from the garden, half-eaten apples, mysterious pebbles, and occasionally a worm, which he tries to tuck lovingly into the baby's swaddling. Despite the well-meaning chaos, there are moments of genuine sweetness. You'll catch the oldest child rocking the cradle with all the seriousness of a junior governess, or a younger sibling shushing the baby with exaggerated care. On rare, magical afternoons, everyone naps at the same time, and the house is as peaceful as a watercolor painting. More often, however, the newborn is serenaded by bickering, clattering toys, and the unmistakable sound of a sibling getting stuck in the linen cupboard. Victorian parents, stretched thin by expectations and endless household duties, rely on this makeshift crew. It's not uncommon for an older child to run errands, feed the baby, or, in moments of desperation, act as messenger to summon the midwife. Sibling rivalry is rampant, but so is camaraderie. Every squabble over who gets to hold the baby is followed by a united front when an adult enters the room, eager to display just how helpful everyone's been. Of course, not all help is welcome. Siblings have a knack for improving the nursery, moving furniture, taste testing the baby's rusk biscuits, or deciding the baby needs an extra layer of wool, even in July. The result is an ongoing tug-of-war between order and gentle mayhem. You learn to measure success not by perfection, but by the fact that everyone's accounted for, the baby is mostly clean, and no one has accidentally fed the baby to the chickens. As evening falls, the siblings gather to say goodnight, each one claiming a kiss or a pat. The baby, now thoroughly overloved and slightly cross-eyed from all the attention, drifts off to sleep, blissfully unaware that tomorrow brings more games, more sticky fingers, and the endless, exhausting affection of a Victorian family. Once the baby is down, you're left alone with your thoughts. The flicker of the gaslight, and a symphony of Victorian house noises. Every groan of the floorboards is either the ghost of a disappointed ancestor or the neighbor's cat with a taste for mischief. You're convinced sleep is a myth invented by poets, and so is peace and quiet. It's late. The kind of late that feels thick and eternal, where even the ticking clock sounds tired. The gaslight casts long, trembling shadows over the wallpaper, turning cherubs into gargoyles and faded florals into crawling vines. Your world shrinks to a quiet, golden-lit cocoon, haunted by the memory of every bedtime warning your mother ever whispered, "Never leave the window open, or the night air will snatch your breath." Keep a Bible on your nightstand, just in case. Don't look too long at your reflection after dark. You sink back into your scratchy linen sheets, blanket pulled high, eyes heavy but mind alert. Somewhere beneath you, the house settles with an alarming thump, as if the beams themselves are sighing at the day's events. Was that the sound of a roof tile slipping, or merely the mice embarking on their nightly Olympics in the attic? No matter. In the Victorian house, there's always something stirring, if not spirits. Then at least the echoes of last winter's draft. Your mind, left untethered by actual sleep, begins its nightly rounds. Did you remember to bank the fire in the kitchen? Did you leave the back door unlocked, inviting in both burglars and family legends about mysterious night visitors? You try to recall if you left the cradle too close to the wall, risking an early start on your child's future phobias. Each creak, each tiny tap, is a gentle reminder that every Victorian house is one part home, one part haunted maze. And, of course, there are the ghosts, both literal and figurative. Every family has a tale. A great aunt who vanished after a scandalous affair with a French painter. A distant cousin who supposedly walks the upstairs hall at midnight, seeking lost spectacles and possibly lost dignity. The children whisper about shadows in the nursery, and even the adults admit, in rare moments, that some staircases are best avoided after dark. It's easy, in the hush of midnight, to feel the weight of so many lives and secrets pressed into the beams and floorboards. Gaslights, for all their modern convenience, are their own kind of worry. The soft hiss and flicker is never fully reassuring. Is it burning cleanly? Will it go out? Did you turn the tap too high or too low? The scent of hot metal and faint coal lingers in the air, mixing with lavender from the linen chest and a hint of whatever Aunt Edith was cooking. Something involving cabbage, you suspect, which now haunts the house in its own right. You pull the blanket tighter and listen to the low drone of distant voices, relatives muttering in their sleep, the occasional snore, and the rhythmic drip-drip of rain sliding down the window pane. Peace and quiet, as it turns out, are relative. You find comfort in the routine of it all, the familiar fears, the house's nighttime song, the vague reassurance that if you're awake, at least you're not alone in your sleeplessness. Somewhere, a baby stirs. Somewhere else, a fox barks, briefly mistaken for a banshee. Eventually, your body gives in, your mind still listing chores and ghost stories, but the weight of the day pulls you under. The house creaks one last time, as if bidding you good night. Gaslight dims, ghosts retreat, and you finally drift into the kind of sleep only a Victorian parent can know. Light, anxious, and ready to leap up at the next baby's cry, or suspiciously misplaced chamber pot. Rest easy. Tomorrow brings more daylight worries, more creaky floors, and, if you're lucky, another gentle haunting or two. So tonight, as you drift off in your clean bed with central heating and a fan humming softly in the background, maybe spare a grateful thought for your Victorian counterparts. Those brave, bewildered souls who survive childbirth with nothing but a pile of scratchy blankets, questionable midwifery, and enough superstitions to fill a Dickens novel. It's almost impossible to imagine just how tough, patient, and honestly, how inventive people had to be to survive a world where pain relief was gin, hygiene was a polite suggestion, and privacy was just a rumor. If you think you've had a rough day, remember, there were women out there giving birth in rooms full of in-laws, livestock, and enough lace to choke a carriage horse. And somehow, against the odds, families made it through. One boiled potato, one tepid bath, and one awkward family christening at a time. Take a moment to appreciate the weird comfort of modern life. Hot water from a tap, clean towels, actual maternity leave, and the fact that nobody's going to hand you a Victorian baby bottle filled with beef broth and optimism. You have painkillers that work, and if you want a doctor, they'll probably wash their hands first. Miraculous. Because history, as grim and ridiculous as it sometimes is proof that humans are stubborn, hopeful, and endlessly creative. The Victorian mothers and babies who came before you, who survived leeches, lace collars, and at least one relative suggesting cabbage leaves for every occasion, helped build the world you live in now, with all its comforts, quirks, and soft pillows. So relax. You've made it to a gentler, cleaner, much less cabbage-oriented era. Pull the blankets up to your chin, close your eyes, and let sleep take over. The ghosts of Victorian midwives are off duty tonight, and you, my friend, are safe, warm, and blessedly unswaddled. Good night.